In this talk, I want you to listen carefully, not just with your ears, but with your nervous system, with that quiet inner voice that has been trying to warn you for a long time. Because when a narcissist shifts from being merely self-centered, manipulative, or emotionally immature into something far darker, something colder, something that feels almost inhuman, your body often knows it before your mind can accept it. People hesitate to use the word evil because it sounds dramatic, exaggerated, or unrealistic. But there are moments when that word is not only appropriate, it is necessary. Evil, in this context, does not mean horns and fire. It means a complete absence of conscience combined with intent. It means harm is no longer accidental. It is deliberate, strategic, and often enjoyed. The first terrifying sign is this. The narcissist no longer reacts emotionally to your pain. Early on, even the most manipulative narcissist may show flashes of emotion. They might apologize, cry, show anger, or appear shaken when confronted. That reaction, however shallow, gives you hope. You think they feel something. There's still a person in there. But when this shift happens, that disappears. You are no longer dealing with someone who is defensive or reactive. You are dealing with someone who is calm while you are breaking. You express hurt, confusion, grief, or fear. And you are met with indifference, boredom, or even a faint smile. Your suffering does not disturb them. In fact, it may soothe them. This is not emotional immaturity. This is emotional eradication. Empathy is gone. At this stage, your tears no longer trigger guilt. They trigger calculation. The narcissist studies your pain the way a scientist studies a specimen. They're learning how far they can push, how much you can tolerate, how to break you without consequence. This is terrifying because empathy is the last internal brake on cruelty. Once it is gone, nothing inside them says stop. And this is where many survivors begin to feel something chilling. It's not just that they don't care anymore. It's that they enjoy watching you hurt, not in an explosive, dramatic way, but in a quiet, controlled, almost peaceful way. That calmness is a warning sign your nervous system should never ignore. The second terrifying sign is the intentional destruction of your reality. Gaslighting is often talked about casually, as if it's just lying or manipulation. But when the narcissist turns darker, gaslighting becomes a weapon, not a defense. They are no longer trying to protect their ego in the moment. They are trying to erase you over time. They systematically deny events you clearly remember. They rewrite conversations. They twist your words. They accuse you of things you never did. They project their own cruelty onto you. And when you try to defend yourself, they mock you for being emotional, unstable, or obsessive. This is not accidental confusion. This is psychological warfare. The goal is simple and terrifying. If you no longer trust your own mind, you will depend on theirs. When your reality collapses, they become the authority. They decide what is real, what matters, what counts as truth. This is how power is consolidated. Survivors often say, "I felt like I was losing my mind." That is not a metaphor. Chronic reality distortion creates real cognitive disorientation. Your brain is constantly trying to reconcile conflicting information, and it exhausts you. When you are exhausted, you are easier to control. What makes this phase especially dangerous is that the narcissist becomes more confident as you become more confused. They speak with certainty. They sound calm and logical. They appear reasonable to outsiders. Meanwhile, you feel frantic, desperate, and incoherent because your internal world is under attack. This reversal is not random. It is designed. The more you doubt yourself, the safer they feel. The more unstable you appear, the more credible they appear. That is why, at this stage, Trying to explain yourself better almost never works. You are not in a misunderstanding. You are in a system of domination. The third terrifying sign is when the narcissist begins to harm you even when there is nothing to gain. Early narcissistic behavior often has a visible motive, control, admiration, validation, supply. But when the shift into something darker happens, the cruelty becomes gratuitous. They hurt you even when it costs them. They sabotage your opportunities. They ruin important moments. They provoke chaos during times that matter most to you. They seem to time their attacks for moments of vulnerability, celebration, or transition. This is no longer about ego maintenance. This is about power and punishment. At this point, you may notice something deeply unsettling. They appear energized by your distress. Your fear, sadness, and confusion seem to fuel them. While you are depleted, they are animated. While you are shrinking, they are expanding. This is where survivors often say, "It felt like they wanted to destroy me." That feeling is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. The narcissist at this stage no longer sees you as a person. You are an object, a target, a container for their rage, envy, and emptiness. This is also the phase where moral boundaries collapse. They lie without hesitation. They manipulate without remorse. They recruit others to isolate you. They smear your reputation while presenting themselves as victims. They use your vulnerabilities as weapons. Things you shared in confidence become tools of humiliation. This is where many people freeze because they are still operating with the assumption that there must be a limit. Surely there is a line they won't cross. Surely they will feel bad eventually. That assumption is dangerous. When someone shows you that they are capable of sustained, intentional harm without remorse, you must believe them. Now, here is the most important part of this message, and the part that is hardest to accept. The moment you recognize these signs is not the moment to confront, argue, or try to wake them up. It is the moment to protect yourself. You cannot reason someone out of cruelty when cruelty is the point. You cannot appeal to empathy when empathy is absent. You cannot explain reality to someone who benefits from your confusion. The idea that love, patience, or clarity will fix this is one of the most damaging myths survivors carry. It keeps you trapped, hopeful, and exposed. Your power begins the moment you stop trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. It begins when you stop defending yourself to someone invested in your guilt. It begins when you stop explaining your pain to someone who feeds on it. Walking away from this dynamic is not weakness. It is an act of psychological self-preservation. It is you choosing your sanity over their sickness. And let me be very clear about something. Recognizing evil does not mean you are cruel, dramatic, or judgmental. It means you are honest. There's a difference between flawed humanity and intentional harm. There's a difference between someone who hurts you because they are wounded and someone who wounds you because it gives them power. Confusing those two keeps people stuck for years. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. If you are listening to this and feeling a quiet, sinking recognition, I want you to know something important. Your awareness is not too late. The fact that you can see the pattern means you are not broken. You are not weak for staying. You were conditioned, manipulated, and worn down. That does not make you foolish. It makes you human. But staying aware means you now have a responsibility to yourself. Not to save them, not to fix them, but to remove yourself from harm. Healing from this kind of experience does not begin with forgiveness or understanding. It begins with distance, with silence. With safety, your nervous system needs time to recalibrate. Your mind needs consistency again. Your identity needs space to reemerge without being constantly undermined. And slowly, painfully, powerfully, you will start to feel something return that you may have lost: trust in yourself. The narcissist's greatest fear is not exposure. It is irrelevance. It is you no longer reacting, no longer explaining, no longer defending, no longer trying. The moment you stop feeding the dynamic, the moment you reclaim your internal authority, their power collapses. They may rage, smear, or escalate, but that is not strength. That is desperation. You do not defeat someone like this by winning arguments. You defeat them by surviving intact, by choosing clarity over chaos, by choosing peace over performance, by choosing yourself even when it feels terrifying to do so. If you take nothing else from this message, take this: evil does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it wears familiarity. But the moment you feel your soul shrinking, your reality warping, and your pain being used against you, that is not love, conflict, or misunderstanding. That is a warning. And you are allowed to listen to it. Your life is not meant to be a battlefield for someone else's emptiness. You are not born to be broken down, erased, or consumed. You were born to grow, to think clearly, to feel safely, and to live freely. And the moment you choose that, truly choose it, the story changes. Not because they become better, but because you become unreachable. One of the most unsettling shifts you will ever witness in another human being is the moment your pain stops registering as meaningful to them. Not because they are overwhelmed, not because they are confused or defensive, but because it simply no longer matters. Early in destructive relationships, there is often conflict mixed with emotion. Anger, tears, defensiveness, even clumsy apologies. Those reactions, however imperfect, signal something crucial: the presence of an internal moral tension. There is still a sense, however faint, that harm has consequences. But when that tension disappears, when your suffering no longer produces any internal disturbance in them, you are no longer dealing with ordinary dysfunction. You are facing the collapse of empathy. Empathy is not just a nice trait. Psychologically speaking, it is a regulatory mechanism. It is what allows one person to limit their capacity for harm because they can imagine the inner experience of another. When empathy is intact, cruelty produces discomfort, guilt emerges, shame appears. These emotions act as brakes. When empathy erodes, those brakes fail. What replaces them is not neutrality, but something colder: observation without concern. Your distress becomes data. Your fear becomes information. Your tears become feedback. And that is a profoundly dangerous transformation. You will notice it first in small moments. You explain something that hurt you deeply, and instead of a response that acknowledges your experience, you receive silence, boredom, or a subtle shift of power. They may look at you as if you are overreacting, or worse, as if you are revealing a weakness. Over time, this creates a strange internal conflict within you. Your instincts tell you something is wrong, yet your mind searches for explanations. Maybe they are tired. Maybe they didn't understand. Maybe if you explain it more clearly. But clarity doesn't help, because misunderstanding is not the problem. The problem is that your pain no longer holds moral weight for them. From a psychological perspective, this is where the relationship becomes asymmetrical. You are still operating as if the other person is bound by the same emotional rules you are. They are not. They are no longer constrained by the discomfort that usually accompanies harming someone you claim to care about. And when that constraint is gone, something else often takes its place: control. You're emotional. Reactions become a way for them to feel powerful, grounded, even superior. This is why the calmness you sense in them during your distress feels so unsettling. It violates a deep social expectation. Humans are wired to respond to suffering, especially in close relationships. When that response is absent, your nervous system detects a threat long before your intellect catches up. Philosophically, this is where we must be precise. There is a difference between being flawed and being dangerous. A flawed person hurts you and feels conflicted about it. A dangerous person hurts you and feels nothing, or worse, feels reinforced. When someone can watch your psychological or emotional pain without internal resistance, The question is no longer whether they will change. The question is how far they are willing to go. Without empathy, there is no internal limit. Only external consequences matter. And if those consequences are absent or delayed, harm escalates. Many people struggle here because they confuse compassion with tolerance. They believe that understanding someone's background, trauma, or insecurity should lead to forgiveness and patience. But compassion without boundaries is not moral virtue. It is self-abandonment. You are not obligated to sacrifice your mental health to preserve someone else's pathology. In fact, doing so often enables it. When your pain produces no consequence, when your suffering is absorbed without response, the dynamic hardens. What was once neglect becomes exploitation. This is why self-doubt is so common at this stage. You ask yourself whether you are being dramatic, whether you are expecting too much, whether your standards are unrealistic. But the issue is not high standards. It is basic humanity. The absence of empathy is not a misunderstanding. It is a signal. And signals exist to be heeded, not debated endlessly. When you encounter someone who can remain emotionally unmoved by your pain, you are being given critical information about the structure of their character. The task before you is not to fix them or awaken their conscience. It is to decide whether you will continue to expose yourself to someone who has demonstrated that your suffering carries no internal cost for them. And that leads to a sobering but liberating realization. Your responsibility is not to be understood by someone incapable of understanding. Your responsibility is to protect what remains of your clarity, dignity, and psychological integrity. Because the moment you stop expecting empathy where none exists, you regain something essential, your ability to choose yourself. If your pain no longer matters to someone, that is not a call to try harder. It is a call to step back, think clearly, and act decisively before indifference turns into deliberate harm. Once empathy collapses, the next transformation is even more destabilizing because it does not just wound you emotionally, it attacks the very structure of your mind. This is where reality itself becomes contested territory. You begin to notice that events you clearly remember are denied with absolute certainty. Conversations are rewritten, promises evaporate. Words you never spoke are attributed to you with confidence. And when you protest, when you try to anchor the discussion to facts, you are told that you are confused, too sensitive, imagining things, or intentionally distorting the truth. This is not ordinary disagreement. This is the systematic erosion of your trust in your own perception. Human beings require a relatively stable sense of reality to function. Your memory, your interpretations, and your emotional responses form a coherent internal map of the world. When that map is repeatedly contradicted by someone you are emotionally bonded to, something inside you begins to fracture. You try to reconcile two incompatible experiences, what you know you lived through and what you are being told did not happen. That tension produces anxiety, self-doubt, and eventually exhaustion. Over time, many people stop trusting their own judgment, not because it is faulty, but because constantly defending it has become too painful. This is where the dynamic becomes truly dangerous. When you no longer trust your own mind, you become dependent on the person who is destabilizing it. You begin to look to them for confirmation of what is real, what matters, and what is acceptable. Psychologically speaking, this is a reversal of authority. The narcissist positions themselves as the arbiter of truth, while you are cast as unreliable, emotional, or unstable. And the more distressed you become, the more convincing their narrative appears to outsiders. Calm confidence is persuasive, even when it is built on deception. It is important to understand that this process is not accidental. At this stage, reality distortion is no longer a defensive maneuver to avoid shame. It is an offensive strategy to maintain power. By keeping you uncertain, they keep you off balance. By keeping you explaining, they keep you subordinate. By forcing you to question your own memory, they gain control without having to use force. This is why logic, evidence, and careful explanations rarely resolve the situation. You are not engaged in a search for truth. You are engaged in a contest for dominance, and the rules are rigged. Philosophically, this is what happens when truth is subordinated to control. When reality becomes negotiable, power fills the vacuum. The narcissist does not need you to believe them fully. They only need you to doubt yourself enough to hesitate. Hesitation is enough. Confusion is enough. As long as you are uncertain, you are manageable. And this is why people caught in this dynamic often describe feeling foggy, scattered, or disconnected from themselves. Their cognitive energy is being consumed by constant self-monitoring and self-defense. You may also notice a profound sense of injustice emerging. You feel misrepresented, unseen, and falsely accused, yet unable to correct the record. Every attempt to clarify seems to make things worse. The more you explain, the more your words are twisted. The more emotional you become, the more you are framed as unstable. This creates a trap. Silence feels like surrender, but speaking feels like self-betrayal. Over time, many people begin to internalize the accusations. They start to wonder whether they really are the problem. That is not insight, that is conditioning. At this point, the most radical act is not arguing better. It is reclaiming your right to your experience. Reality does not require consensus to exist. Your memories do not become invalid because someone denies them. Your emotional responses do not become irrational because someone benefits from dismissing them. Psychological stability is not achieved by convincing a manipulator of the truth. It is achieved by stepping out of a system that punishes clarity and rewards confusion. This is also where distance becomes essential. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but as containment. A mind under constant attack cannot heal while remaining in the line of fire. Space allows your perceptions to settle again. It allows your nervous system to calm. It allows you to hear your own thoughts without immediate contradiction. And slowly, something remarkable happens. Your confidence begins to return, not because someone validated you, but because the interference stopped. When someone repeatedly undermines your sense of reality, they are not engaging in dialogue. They are attempting to occupy your mind. And the moment you recognize that, you are faced with a choice that is both frightening and empowering. Continue negotiating your sanity with someone who profits from your confusion, or step back and reclaim authorship over your own life. Because the truth is this: anyone who needs you to doubt yourself in order to feel powerful is not offering connection. They are demanding submission. And the moment you refuse to surrender, your perception of reality, the entire structure they rely on, begins to collapse. When cruelty continues, even when there is nothing obvious to gain, you have crossed into the most revealing and most dangerous phase of this dynamic. Early on, harmful behavior often appears transactional. There is a goal, even if it is ugly: control, admiration, reassurance, dominance. You can trace the motive, and because you can trace it, you tell yourself it might be negotiable. But there comes a point when the harm no longer serves any practical purpose. They sabotage opportunities that do not threaten them. They ruin moments that could have passed quietly. They provoke conflict that costs them time, energy, and reputation. And that is when you must confront a disturbing truth. The harm itself has become the reward. Psychologically, this marks a shift from ego regulation to power gratification. The narcissist is no longer trying to stabilize their self-image. They are asserting dominance for its own sake. Your distress, confusion, or humiliation produces a sense of vitality in them. It makes them feel real, significant, and superior. This is why the timing of their cruelty often feels deliberate. It emerges during moments of vulnerability, growth, or joy. Moments when you are least offended and most open. That is not coincidence. It is selection. You may find yourself asking why someone would do this when there is no benefit, when it damages the relationship, when it makes life harder for everyone involved. But that question assumes a shared value system. It assumes that harmony, progress, and mutual well-being matter to them in the same way they matter to you. At this stage, they do not. What matters is the experience of power, and power is most intoxicating when it is exercised without resistance. This is where many people freeze, because the behavior violates their internal model of how humans are supposed to work. We are taught that people pursue self-interest rationally. They avoid unnecessary harm, that cruelty has a cause that can be addressed. But when harm persists without reason, it forces you to consider something uncomfortable. Not all behavior is motivated by repair or gain. Some behavior is motivated by destruction. And refusing to acknowledge that possibility keeps you exposed to it. There is also a moral confusion that arises here. You may feel that walking away is an overreaction, that disengaging is cruel, that setting boundaries is unfair. But notice what has happened. You are holding yourself to ethical standards that the other person has long abandoned. You are asking whether it is right to protect yourself from someone who has demonstrated that your suffering is acceptable to them. That imbalance is not virtue. It is vulnerability being exploited. Philosophically, this is the moment when intention matters more than explanation. You can spend years analyzing why someone behaves this way, tracing it back to childhood trauma or insecurity. Understanding can be useful, but it does not neutralize danger. A person may be wounded and still be responsible for the harm they cause. When cruelty becomes habitual and unrestrained, motive becomes secondary to impact. The question is no longer why they are doing it. The question is what it is doing to you. At this stage, hope becomes hazardous. Hope that they will suddenly see the damage. Hope that this time will be different. Hope that if you just remain calm, kind, or consistent, something will shift. That hope keeps you present in a system that is actively eroding you. And what makes this especially insidious is that the narcissist often interprets your endurance as permission. The absence of consequence confirms their sense of entitlement. This is where the idea of self-protection must be redefined. It is not aggression. It is not abandonment. It is not punishment. It is recognition of reality. If someone repeatedly harms you without remorse, distance is not a strategy. It is a necessity. You cannot negotiate with someone who experiences your pain as irrelevant or rewarding. You cannot build trust with someone who demonstrates that destruction is acceptable collateral. And yet, choosing to step away often feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, because leaving means accepting that the person you hope they could be is not the person they are. It means grieving not just the relationship, but the fantasy of resolution. But clarity, though painful, is stabilizing. It allows your nervous system to stand down. It allows your mind to stop scanning for the next threat. It allows you to begin the slow process of reclaiming your sense of agency. The paradox is this: the moment you stop engaging, the dynamic loses its fuel. Cruelty without an audience loses its potency. Power without access becomes meaningless. And while they may escalate briefly, that escalation is not strength. It is exposure. It reveals how dependent they were on your participation. So here is the final truth to sit with. When someone harms you, even when there is nothing to gain, they are telling you exactly who they are. Your task is not to correct them. Your task is to believe them. Because the most decisive act you can take is not to endure what diminishes you, but to walk away intact, carrying forward the knowledge that your life is not meant to be a proving ground for someone else's need to dominate.